Hey, Crime Salad listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Crime Salad, where we talk true crime. My name is Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
And this week we have a very interesting case for you, one that is both heartbreaking and shocking. Now, just a heads up, this is a two-parter. So this is part one of the episode titled Stolen Betrayal, The Life and Tragedy of Lita McClinton, part one. And next week, we will be serving you part two. Be sure to subscribe so you get notified when part two becomes available. Now, before we begin, please be advised that this episode discusses sensitive topics, including domestic violence and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Today, we bring you the story of Lita Gail McClinton, a beloved African-American Atlanta socialite whose life was full of promise until a man she trusted betrayed her in the most horrific way. Lita had a deeply supportive family who saw through Jim from the very start. They were always there for her, offering the love and care she needed. Whenever she felt upset, frustrated, or angry, she could make the hour or two-long drive to be with them. But even with their support, it was still incredibly difficult for her to endure a life with her then-husband, Jim. You see, as a child, Lita grew up in a very protective bubble. Her parents, Emery and Joanne McClinton, who are well known and respected in Atlanta, tried everything that they could to protect Lita, her sister Valencia, and their brother Emery Jr. And they just didn't want Lita to marry Mr. Sullivan, but they were afraid of alienating her. They didn't realize that Lita and Jim's vows would eventually lead to Lita's death. Because when Lita tried to break her vows, Jim had her killed. And for years, police tried to find the evidence to prove that Jim did it. Then when they were finally able to charge him for murder with solid evidence, however, by that time, Jim had disappeared. He was a fugitive running across continents, escaping arrest. More than 15 years later, police finally found Jim in Thailand in May of 2002. And Thailand police were the ones who arrested Jim.
So we got a criminal world traveler here.
Yes. Now, let me start by telling you a little about Lita's family so that you can get an understanding of her perspective and where she came from. Lita's parents were Emery Cody McClinton Sr. and Joanne Godfrey McClinton. The two had met at a Catholic school when both of them were in fourth grade, and they grew up to be very close friends, and when they were high school seniors, they got married, and the two had been a couple ever since. They had their first child on January 7th of 1952, born Lita Gail McClinton. She was the apple of their eyes. Then they had two more children after that. Now, at the beginning of their marriage, they didn't have a lot of money. Both were still beginning their careers. So during those first years, they lived with Joanne's mother, which would be Lita's grandma. She helped pay the bills, raise the babies, while Emery Sr. studied to become an engineer at Tuskegee University.
So it sounds like Lita grew up in a pretty supportive family, like a strong family environment.
Yeah. Now, during the time when Lita's dad was looking to attend college, segregation was deeply entrenched, and most colleges were predominantly white. So Tuskegee University became his choice. Each week, Emery Sr. took the bus to and from Tuskegee, Alabama, to earn his engineering degree. Actually, what's interesting is this university was founded on July 4th, 1881, about 16 years after slavery ended. And during that time, historically Black colleges and universities were being established to provide education and opportunities for African Americans who were largely excluded from white institutions.
This is now 1950, and we're still experiencing racism.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And it actually wasn't until 1961 that Georgia Tech would become the first all-white university in the South, not just Georgia, that would admit African Americans. And that was only due to a court order.
Holy cow.
Yeah, so life wasn't very easy for the McClinton family, but they made it work. They relied on one another and helped one another survive the best times in their lives and also the worst times. Lita's death was the worst point in their lives.
So the fact that she grew up in such a protective bubble, 100% makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
These were tough times.
They were, for sure. Joanne made sure to instill in her children faith in God. The McClintons were a Catholic family, and all three of the children had attended Catholic schools. The McClintons believed Catholic schools provided their children with a top-notch education. So Lita and her siblings attended Drexel High School, an all-black Catholic school in the neighborhood. And it wasn't until 1967, more than a decade after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, that the Archdiocese closed Drexel due to needing to desegregate. So under new desegregation rules, most black students had to take the bus to St. Joseph in downtown Atlanta, but Joanne refused. She felt the school was inferior and fought to send her children to St. Pius X Catholic High School instead.
Wow, talk about how tough that must have been for Lita. I mean, she's changing schools as a high schooler, so she's been in school for all of these years, made all these friends in this type of routine. And then she's thrown into this predominantly white school, not to mention as a high schooler. So it's like these groups are already defined.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like she would have almost felt like an outsider at first.
Yeah, it's almost like she got ripped off of her high school years in a way.
Yeah. I would say that it most likely wasn't easy at all for Lita and her siblings. Actually, Lita and her sister became two of the first black students to integrate St. Pius. But it was painful, especially when white classmates laughed about Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination in 1968. Still, as she often would in life, Lita ignored them and moved on.
Good for her, honestly.
Yeah, as you can tell, Lita, she was very strong and determined.
Well, she was raised that way.
Yeah. And like we said, she was growing up in a time of change. She believed in Dr. King's values and didn't need any validation from her classmates. She already had friends who shared her beliefs. She was outgoing, charming, and she made friends easily, whether it was at school or elsewhere. She also loved to dance, dress up, and she was always smiling. And as she walked to and from school, she would admire the wildflowers along the way.
She's definitely strong and brave. And to be honest, I think her parents are responsible for that. They did a great job preparing her for how tough the world can be.
Exactly. She carried that weight while also looking out for her siblings and maintaining top grades. And education was a top priority in the McClinton household. Their parents knew that in the real world, black men, especially black women, had to work twice as hard to succeed. White men with average grades could still climb the corporate ladder, but for black students, discrimination and bias made it an uphill battle. That's why Joanne always told her children, no, you cannot afford to be average. Once, when Valencia brought home a C, she told her parents that the school's teachers said that a C was average. The next day, Joanne marched to the school and told them, don't ever tell my child a C is average. I expect more from them, and they expect more from themselves.
I think a good example of this is it's kind of like a sports drill that they did, and everybody stood at the line. So this is white kids, black kids, all races, whatever. And basically they asked questions. They said, did you grow up with only one parent? Take 4 steps back. Did you grow up with a grandparent? Take another 4 steps back. Did you do this? Blah, blah, blah. All these adversity type questions, right? And then they had a race. It was like a 100-yard race or something like that. And that showed the disadvantage they had to take. So a lot of those kids and it's not just black kids, but it's kids that grew up in poverty or just bad situations, they had to start the same race as other kids, a 100-yard race, maybe 140 yards back, know? And I think that's great that the parents really enforce this. Like I said before, I mean, it's a tough world, and I think they prepared her for that.
That's a really interesting story, too. I'd like to see that video. In fact, Lita's grades got her into Spelman College in Atlanta, where she was a top student. She studied political science because she wanted to become a lawyer, and she made friends, and she participated in campus organizations. And it was in Spelman College where Lita made one of her closest friends, Poppy Finley, who was another political science major who also did the commute from home to campus. They were always seen together, and it was hard to tear them apart. So Lita and her siblings, they grew up in this lifestyle where they had to work really hard with the desire to make something of themselves. Lita wanted to make sure that she did everything she could to ensure she had a promising future and a long-lasting relationship just like her parents. When Lita was born, the civil rights movement had yet to begin, and segregation was still the norm. As a child, she witnessed key events that fueled the fight against racism. At just 2 years old, the Supreme Court ruled segregation in public schools unconstitutional in the Brown versus Board of Education. By 8, she saw Morehouse College students staging sit-ins in Atlanta. A year later, she heard about the Freedom Riders, black and white activists, challenging segregation at Southern bus terminals.
Wow, so she lived through so many things that just reshaped the country's racist policies, at least on paper, of course. And what's sad about this, though, is that even though these things are changing in the government, that doesn't mean that it changed the perception of the communities around her. So she most likely still experienced racism on an extreme level.
Yeah, everything was in the works, but yeah, there was still racism.
Mm-hmm.
It's very strong. And also during Lita's youth, she actually witnessed the fall of laws banning interracial marriage, which is really interesting. She was 15 years old when she saw the Supreme Court legalize interracial marriage in the Loving versus Virginia case, which took place in 1967. Mildred and Richard Loving are an interracial couple, and they were sentenced to a year in prison for marrying. They appealed, and the court ruled such bans violated the 14th Amendment. Now, had the Lovings not fought back, Lita's marriage to Mr. Sullivan would have been illegal. Now, Lita, throughout college, had continued to date a boy that she had met when she was in high school. He was handsome, intelligent, and he was related to Mayor Jackson. He was attending Howard University in D.C., so they were working through this long-distance relationship. Then one day, Lita found out that her boyfriend had come to Atlanta for a visit without letting her know. Lita didn't know what she had done wrong. Later, she would find out that her boyfriend had come out as gay and was scared to tell her. So their relationship ended. And Lita, she also made a discovery about herself. When she graduated from Spelman, she realized that she didn't want to be an attorney. Instead, she had a huge interest in fashion. She wanted to work in the fashion industry. So not long after graduating, Lita starts working at T. Edwards, a high-end boutique in Lenox Square. There, she starts learning more about the fashion world. She learns about merchandising and managing inventory. It's during this time, when she was 25 years old, that she sees a man with red hair. His name is Jim Vincent Sullivan. That day changed her life, and unfortunately, it did not change for the good.
The Devil Wears Prada. The devil from Massachusetts.
Yes. Now, he may have looked innocent and charming when he smiled at Lita that day when he saw her at T. Edwards, but his eyes were hiding evil and greed. James Vincent Sullivan, who goes by Jim, was born on April 5th, 1941, in a working-class suburb found on Boston's South Side. Just like Lita, he grew up in a Catholic family, but his family was a working-class family. His father was a typesetter at a Hearst-owned local newspaper, and his mother was a homemaker. The two had 3 children, Jim, Francis, and Rosemary. Rosemary was the baby of the family. And Jim, he was very smart from the get-go. After elementary school, he won acceptance into the Boston Latin School, known to be a prestigious prep school. He always got good grades, but his favorite subject was math. And as the story unravels, you will learn that money becomes everything to Jim. He will do anything, even possibly murder, to make sure he has a profitable life. Now, before Lita came into the picture, at the age of 17, Jim met Catherine Murray. Catherine sang in the same church where Jim was an altar boy. They began dating quickly, and soon they became very close. He began going with Catherine and her family on their summer trips to Nantasket Beach, which is along the Massachusetts shoreline. Jim graduated in 1958 from high school, and he won a scholarship to attend the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. He studied economics in college while Catherine attended nursing school, and they still kept this relationship going strong. Now, while they were both in college, they would see each other when they could on the weekends, Christmas, or different holidays. And when Jim graduated with his economic degree in 1962, he got his first job in the accounting department of Jordan Marsh, a well-known Boston headquartered department store.
Well, it seems like Jim was on a pretty good plan. I mean, he got a scholarship, he went to school. I mean, he took the proper steps to succeed. It seemed like he was on a pretty good path.
Yeah, and he also went to graduate school at night, and he took business management classes at Boston University. And right on schedule, they married in 1965. Jim was 24 and Catherine was 23. And the babies came right after one another, 4 in total. Life was okay. They were making enough to feed his family. Catherine was happy and comfortable, but Jim got bored. He wanted something new, something exciting. His job no longer held his interest. Now in his 30s, he wasn't exactly satisfied with this planned-out life. Then something thrilling did happen. An uncle of his called, Uncle Frank Beinert. Uncle Frank was the rich uncle. He had founded the Macon-based Crown Beverages, a wholesale liquor distribution company, in 1962. And he grew that company into an extremely successful company that was worth millions of dollars. Uncle Frank was 64, married, and with no children, and so he wanted to find someone to take over the business while he retired. And he thought Jim, his nephew, might be the person.
I mean, he didn't have a son, so Jim was the next best thing, honestly. I mean, he was on a good path. It makes sense.
And that's most likely what Frank saw in him, too. And Jim thought this was the excitement he was looking for. But there was a problem. Catherine didn't want to move to Georgia with the children. She liked the life that they had built for themselves in Massachusetts. But Jim didn't care what his wife wanted. He took his uncle up on his offer and dragged Catherine and the children with him. The Massachusetts family were transplanted to Macon, Georgia, a southern rural city that was nothing like the Boston that they were used to up north.
Talk about a cultural shock.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia would have different weather, different everything, different people.
Yeah, so there was all of that, and not surprisingly, it wasn't long before Catherine began resenting Jim for bringing her and the family to Georgia. She had fallen in love with the teenage Jim, but the adult version only wanted to focus on his wants and desires. He didn't think about how his decisions would impact the family. It becomes worse for Catherine as Jim continues to become busier with the new job, and she hardly gets to see him.
I could see how that would put a strain on the relationship.
Yeah, and it did. It ended up not being a good move. Even Uncle Frank started to make that realization. Once Jim started working at Crown Beverages, Uncle Frank realized that Jim was not suited for the company. Even other company employees found Jim to be arrogant, brash, and plain difficult to work with. So after 10 months, Uncle Frank was going to fire Jim.
Wow, so it hadn't even been a full year and he's ready to get rid of him.
Yeah. It was during Christmas in 1974. Jim and the family were visiting relatives in Boston. Meanwhile, Uncle Frank asked his attorney to draw up paperwork to remove Jim from his will.
Honestly, that paints a picture because not only does he want to fire him, he wants to remove him from the will entirely.
Yeah, and he may have thought everything he was doing was a secret, but everyone kind of knew what he was preparing to do. In addition to gathering all of the legal paperwork, Uncle Frank wrote out a statement to explain why he was firing his nephew. And in it, he wrote to Jim, "You haven't carried your weight, earned your keep, or made our lives any easier, better, or happier by coming here. On the contrary, you have made things harder for just about everyone, and you have put a serious and undue strain upon me and my family's well-being. Further, you have shown little reciprocity."
I'm curious what he did because it sounds like he was just lazy, but now I don't know, with a statement like that, it seems like he did something, like was shady, stealing, something of that nature. And then to be removed from the will entirely, not that you just weren't capable of running a business of that stature, he wants you gone from the family at this point.
Yeah, he must have done something horrible. Maybe it was just his arrogance and just everything. It was just not a good fit. And you would think that it would have been a nice transition for Jim because he's getting this company, like this $1 million company. But as you will see, Jim had a big problem with snubbing his nose at other people. He always thought that he was superior to everyone else. And while Uncle Frank was getting ready to terminate Jim from the job and remove him from his will, he actually never got the chance. Uncle Frank, known for being healthy, suddenly died.
Wow, talk about timing. So what happened? I mean, was this a heart attack or something unexpected?
Well, so no one really knows the cause of his death. All we know is that Jim headed back to Boston on January 3rd of 1975, and later that same day, Uncle Frank was in the downtown warehouse, and he became suddenly, mysteriously ill. His stomach cramped, and he fainted on top of crates filled with alcohol. 2 of his employees, warehouse stockmen, found him lying on top of the crates. They helped him up and brought him to his home. Now, that night, he didn't feel any better. He kept vomiting all night long. His stomach was in a crazy amount of pain. He felt nauseous, and he would have gone to the hospital, but his wife, Agnes, wouldn't let him go. She was a staunch Christian Scientist, and she believed only God healed all illnesses, not medication. And so he was sick for 5 days before he ignored Agnes's advice and called for help. Eventually, he did make it to the hospital, but it would be, unfortunately, too late. Jim flew back into Macon, Georgia during the time when his uncle was at the hospital. And a few hours later, Uncle Jim died, and he was only 65 years old.
Wow. I mean, that's so suspicious. And honestly, if everyone knew what Uncle Frank was going to do, obviously Jim did too. And this sounds so much more like poisoning or something like that I'm sure they didn't even test for or look for.
Yeah, and what makes this even more suspicious is that law enforcement officials, they were not able to investigate the death at all. There wasn't even an autopsy. Because as soon as Uncle Frank died, Jim signed for the body so that it could be transported to Boston to be cremated. No one knows why Jim was in such a hurry to have his uncle cremated. Doctors ruled Frank's death to be a result of cardiac arrest. However, most people who knew Jim believed that he had something to do with this bizarre death.
I mean, I don't blame them at all. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but stomach pain with vomiting doesn't sound like cardiac arrest. Not to mention it lasted 5 days.
Right.
And even more so, there's this huge motive, money related.
Yeah, money was definitely in the picture. Uncle Frank dying before he could write Jim out of his will meant that, well, Jim inherited a multi-million-dollar business, Crown Beverages.
Lucky him.
And Crown Beverages employees also noticed something else. When Jim returned to work after his uncle died, Jim showed no remorse. Writer John Connolly, who used to be an NYPD police detective, would later write that Jim told him, "After I was there at Crown Beverages, only 10 months, that fat old bastard keeled over from a heart attack right onto a pallet of vodka."
Which is really a weird and horrible thing to say about your uncle who just died.
Yeah, a fat old bastard. That's really harsh. Now, one employee, Sherry Davis, who used to work at Crown Beverages, she was the office manager, and she stated, quote, "When Frank died, we all suspected Jim from the beginning. Frank's friend, Joe Cohen, asked about an autopsy and found that Frank had been shipped back to Boston or wherever he came from. Everyone suspected Jim killed his uncle, but there was no police investigation at the time," unquote.
And with all the red flags, it's just a shame that they weren't able to do an autopsy.
Yeah, to see what he really died from. Like, how do they know it was a heart attack or cardiac arrest?
And at this point, he's cremated, so everything's gone.
Yeah. Now, about a week after Uncle Frank died, Jim's wife, Catherine, she left with the children, and she didn't look back. She loaded the station wagon with her children, took a few of their possessions, and she drove back to Boston. Now, before she left, she gave a few parting words to Jim. Money doesn't make you happy. And Jim doesn't mend the relationship he had with the mother of his children. He provides Catherine with a lump sum of $10,000, the station wagon, full custody of the children, and child support of $1,000 per month. And that's all the help she received to take care of the 4 children. Now, while Jim attended private school as a child, he told Catherine he was not paying for private schooling for his kids. If she wanted to give them a private school education, she would have to pay for everything herself. Now, Jim, he did get visitation with the children, but he wasn't really with the children when they did visit, and rarely did he ask about the kids either. And Catherine, she didn't fight back. She just wanted the marriage to end. Now, Connolly, the former NYPD officer that we mentioned, he had his own theory about what happened to Uncle Frank. He also believed that Jim killed his uncle. Connolly believed that it was no coincidence that Catherine, Jim's now separated wife, left the week after Uncle Frank's death. Connolly thought that when Uncle Frank died, Catherine must have realized that Jim used an anticoagulant drug called Coumadin to kill his uncle that was prescribed to her during her pregnancy with their first child. She had surgery to remove blood clots, and doctors had prescribed Coumadin to her. And when they had talked to the doctor about this medication when she received it, she recalled all of the questions her then husband, Jim, asked, wanting to know the symptoms, almost like he was planning on using the medication on somebody. But then the opportunity to move to Macon, Georgia had not even come up. Still, he had all of this information.
It almost makes you wonder if he was wanting to kill her.
Yeah, that's possible too. Now, there was also this other theory that Connolly had. With the knowledge of this medication, Connolly thought that Jim most likely asked his wife, who is a nurse, for Coumadin, telling her that he needed it for a customer. And at the time, maybe she believed him. Then, maybe after the death, she realized what happened, and she assisted unknowingly in the murder. And then maybe he warned her, maybe he said something like, "If you ever say anything about me, I'll say you were in on this." Connolly's theory came from information from Catherine herself after she finally agreed to meet him after a lot of pleading and begging. And Connolly guessed that he had to do so much begging because Catherine had been too scared to talk about her husband, frightened about what her husband might do to her.
I mean, honestly, it all sounds like it could be true.
Yeah. And Connolly, he even dug in a little further. He called Dr. Michael Baden, who used to be New York City's medical examiner for 25 years, from 1960 to 1985. At the time when Connolly talked to Dr. Baden, he was currently the co-director for the Medical Legal Investigative Unit of the New York State Police. Connolly asked him if the symptoms Uncle Fred suffered could be similar to those who suffer from Coumadin poisoning. And Dr. Baden said that they could be, but without an autopsy or evidence, no one can do anything. Now, a quick Google search reveals that too much Coumadin in the bloodstream can trigger a range of symptoms, some mild, others far more dangerous. And while it may not always cause immediate death, its effects can be alarming. Rashes, severe headaches, dizziness, and excruciating stomach pain, just like what we know Uncle Frank was suffering from. And in extreme cases, an overdose can lead to vomiting blood or, even worse, a fatal poisoning. Originally approved for human use in 1954, warfarin sodium hit the market under the brand name Coumadin. Ironically, it became not only the most commonly prescribed blood thinner in the world, but also one of the most effective rat poisons ever developed.
Rat poison? He was vomiting too, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Now, we don't know if there was blood in his vomit, but Jim made sure that there was no way for anyone to inquire into the circumstances surrounding Uncle Frank's death.
I mean, it kind of seems like an accurate theory.
Yeah, Uncle Frank will be one of those unsolved mysteries, unfortunately. And so as time passes, Jim's wife and kids are now out of the picture, and he's looking to live on with his life with his inheritance.
Dollar bill, y'all.
And during one of those trips, Jim walks into a T. Edwards boutique, and he notices a young African-American woman. She sees him, and she smiles. Her smile is gorgeous, and she greets him. "Hello, how can I help you?" And this beautiful woman is 25-year-old Lita McClinton, and she has no clue that she was greeted with a seemingly twisted, abusive individual.
And possibly a murderer.
Yeah. And so they meet and they quickly fell for one another. It starts with Jim asking Lita out for coffee. Then they go to the movies. Then they watch basketball games. Lita's father makes sure that these dates are chaperoned by different family friends. And if you remember, Lita's family is a very protective and caring family for their children.
Well, not to mention, I mean, she's 25 and he's chaperoning.
It was probably for the best, honestly. Then they start to go out to dinner and they start to dance, and these dates turn into private evenings together. And Jim, the millionaire who could, if you remember, only afford to give his ex-wife child support of $1,000 per month, started buying her many gifts. He also compliments her all the time. He tells her she is stunning.
It's like a nice little love story.
Yeah, it seems like it. And I just wish Lita knew that she actually met the devil who came from Massachusetts. But she thought that he was the most charming man she could have ever met. He was handsome too, thin and fit and almost 6 feet tall. His Irish face was surrounded by red hair. But then she thought his haircut was off, so as soon as they started dating, Lita started to fix him up. She improves his wardrobe, and she shows him a new way to style his hair. And when she's done with her makeover, Lita's friends could see why Lita had fallen for him.
The devil wears Prada.
Yeah, and so she knew how to change Jim to impress her friends and maybe her brother and sister, but Jim could not fool Lita's parents, Joanne and Emery Sr. Lita had been on so many dates with Jim that Mr. and Mrs. McClinton asked to see Jim. They wanted to meet him. Their immediate reaction, they absolutely hated him. They listed a number of negatives. He was too old at the age of 34, and their daughter was 25. He seemed fake and was always trying to be a know-it-all. And he always had to be competitive. He took up tennis just to challenge Lita's father, Emery Sr.
Okay, so he's still an arrogant a-hole.
Right. His arrogance was the worst of all. He was always trying to show off as if he was the most important and smartest man in the room. Joanne remembered the first time they saw their future son-in-law. She said, usually when parents walk into the room, most young men stand up. Jim did not respond as quickly as we thought he should have. Maybe he didn't think it was necessary. He was nearer our age than Lita's. And while the parents may have had some hesitations, well, let's face it, a lot of hesitations, Lita kept seeing Jim. And she didn't know how her parents actually felt because they never told her. They were worried that by being honest with her, they would cause Lita to turn away from them. They just prayed that Lita would get tired of this 30-something arrogant man.
Well, hindsight is 20/20.
True. Now, sometimes when you're with someone, you don't see all the red flags as clearly as someone from the outside may see them. And even though they may not have told Lita about everything they felt about Jim Sullivan, their instant dislike for him, she knew from their actions that they weren't entirely happy with her selection. She could tell that something was wrong. But it wasn't just his personality that they didn't like. They were worried about his race, too. Even if his love for her was of the best intentions, it is difficult to maintain an interracial marriage, let alone an interracial relationship.
No, I totally get it. But I think Lita probably thought she was more progressive than her family, and she probably wondered if they were just stuck on the fact that he was white.
Yeah. Well, if you remember, it was in 1967 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the Loving v. Virginia that interracial marriages were legal under the 14th Amendment. However, Georgia, they didn't change their laws until February 13th of 1972 when a federal judge ruled that the state's ban on interracial marriages was unconstitutional. And this was just a few years before Lita met Jim. They met 5 years after this became legal, but as you can understand, it was still unusual in a way, and it wasn't very traditional. So you can understand why the McClintons, they were worried about their daughter seeing a white man, especially when the laws had only been repealed recently. And just like there's still today, at this time there were still many individuals with racist attitudes in the area, especially Macon, Georgia, where this story mainly takes place. But it was a whirlwind romance, and it wasn't long before Jim proposed to his new sweetheart, Lita, and she accepts. Her parents don't want this marriage to occur, but they also want Lita to be happy. They can't stop her from getting married to him. Instead, they do what they can to prepare Lita for what should be the happiest day of her life. The motions they are going through, helping choose the wedding dress, picking out decorations, these were all mechanical motions. Lita was excited. When Christmas of 1975 came around, she had already picked out her wedding dress, and she also quit her job. She wanted to be free for whatever her future husband needed. Then it was the night before their lovely wedding day when Jim decided to stir the pot, or spill the beans, however you want to say it. So, do you remember when Jim was married before and he had 4 kids?
Oh, no, he didn't tell her.
Jim decided to tell Lita that he had 4 kids and was also previously married the night before their wedding day.
Ooh, so he never thought about bringing this up.
Never thought about it. Maybe he just didn't know when the right time was. I don't want to make excuses for him. But yeah.
Ouch.
This is the kind of news that you would tell someone, not on your wedding day, maybe like in the dating phase or when you're starting to talk with someone.
Yeah, so, we're getting married tomorrow, but I'm divorced and I have 4 kids.
Yeah, and exactly. And it was such a shock the day before her wedding.
Well, I'm sure that really set the mood.
Yeah, it made things a little difficult. Now, for some reason, Mr. Jim Know-It-All Sullivan, he let it slip up at this perfect time, and he continued to tell Lita that the divorce had become final less than a year before. And as a footnote to this conversation, he also mentioned that he had 4 kids.
And I'm assuming that none of these 4 kids or his ex-wife were involved in the wedding.
They weren't invited or anything. I don't think they even knew about it. He's giving Lita all this information the night beforehand, and Lita is probably thinking, among other things, 2 things. Why hadn't Jim told her about his previous marriage? And how was she going to tell her parents?
Honestly, I'd be wondering what else he's keeping from me.
Yeah, that too. Lita definitely deserved better than Jim.
Yeah, he's a little shitbag, but I'm assuming she never told her parents the truth then, right?
Well, she did. So the morning of the wedding, Joanne and Emery Sr., they were staying at a Macon hotel when Lita gave them a call. Joanne answered the phone, and she could hear her daughter's soft voice on the other end of the phone. It was a whisper. Immediately, Joanne knew something was wrong. Lita, sweet baby, what is wrong? Lita mentally prepared herself for her parents' reaction. She knew that they were not going to be happy with the news. The one pro that her parents liked about the groom was that he was from a Catholic family. Catholicism frowned upon divorce. Jim was in his mid-30s, and he was already divorced.
Well, there goes his saving grace.
Lita started out the conversation with, I have to tell you something. She kept going. Just listen and don't panic. Joanne asked what was wrong. She just came out with the announcement. She said, Jim was married before, and he's divorced. And I don't think Joanne and Emery Sr. believed what they were hearing. Excuse me? Lita's mom asked. He's what? Lita told them everything. Not only was Jim married, he was also the father of 4 children, all of whom, the ex-wife and the children, lived in Boston. Lita, in a few short hours, would become a stepmother to 4 children she didn't even know existed.
And they didn't take the news well, I'm assuming.
Not really. Emery Sr. took the phone and demanded to speak to Jim. He began questioning him, asking him why he would keep his background, his family, for heaven's sake, a secret. They argued on the phone, and when Emery Sr. hung up with Jim, he was probably in a rage. However, there was no stopping the couple. The wedding was still on. They got married on December 19th of 1976, and it took place on the 12-acre estate that Jim had inherited from his Uncle Frank, the one who died under mysterious circumstances.
Oh, you mean the one he murdered?
Oh, not for sure, but yeah, that Uncle Frank. Lita's great-uncle, Reverend John Robert Smith, with the African Methodist Episcopal Church, married the couple. Lita was outfitted in a Neiman Marcus champagne-colored dress. And her mother, Joanne, remembers that day with sadness. The wedding was one of the most miserable and disappointing days of my life. She would later say, I tried not to show it. Emery and I went through the act. Later, I found a photograph of myself sitting in a window, looking so dejected, so bad that I tore it up. I saw all of the pain on my face, and I just couldn't keep it.
Man, I feel so bad for the parents because they knew it wasn't right, but there was literally nothing they could do about it.
Yeah, they had to sit there and watch this all pan out. Also, if you examine some of the stuff that Jim had told Lita's family during their whirlwind of a courtship, you would discover the omission that he kept from Lita until their wedding was not the only red flag.
Oh, I knew that little sleazeball had more secrets.
So he told others that he graduated from Harvard. In reality, he had attended the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester for his undergraduate studies, and he had taken graduate classes at Boston University. I'm not even sure if he graduated from Boston University. He also told others that his father was an editor at one of the Hearst newspapers in California. His father was never an editor. His father was actually a typesetter. And to my knowledge, they never lived in California. They had always lived in Massachusetts. And I wouldn't be surprised if he threw some other lies out there too.
I can't get over the fact that he even cared to lie to people and say that he graduated from Harvard or any of that stuff. I mean, he lied that he wasn't a typesetter. Who cares? You're already a millionaire. Like, what do you have to prove?
Right. And he wasn't only lying to Lita and her family, he was lying to Catherine and his children too. He never told Catherine and the kids that he was getting married. When the children visited Lita and Jim, they would return to their mom after their visit and would tell them that their father was sleeping with the maid.
Oh, so he probably told them that she was a maid. I don't know, maybe with the mysterious death of his uncle, he's just trying to keep up with these small lies.
Yeah, almost for practice or something.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after the wedding, there may have been a short honeymoon period, but things quickly went downhill. Jim did not want to be tied down to one wife. Not long into the relationship, he began to stray, chasing after multiple women. To give himself more time for his adulterous ways, he encouraged Lita to stay in Atlanta during the weekends with her family and her friends. She could drive the hour and a half drive to Macon every weekend. And he explained that he was going to be so busy with the company that, at least for a while, he was not going to have the time to shop for house decorations or furniture. She would probably have more fun staying in Atlanta anyway, instead of being bored in Macon. She could get herself a job too.
Why does it seem like he wants separate lives already?
Yeah, it seems like he just totally flipped right after they got married. I mean, he worked so hard to woo her, and it just seemed to anyone that he wanted to be with her so bad. You know, he bought all these things for her, and now it's kind of like, I don't even want you around, just go back to Atlanta.
I don't know, maybe he got off on the excitement of lying and sneaking around.
Yeah, it seems like it. Maybe that was one of the reasons. Now, about 2 to 3 years later, Lita, she finally moves to Macon permanently with Jim. It's 1978. She quits her job in Atlanta and she starts working at Davidson's department store in Macon. Most people may know the store by its later name, Macy's. Lita and Jim spent $350,000 on a beautiful home on Nottingham Drive in Shirley Hills, an affluent and historically white neighborhood established in 1921. And Jim's arrogance didn't help. He often looked down on others. Now, on top of that, he had married a black woman and he moved her into a community where interracial couples were rare and often. Some residents made their disapproval clear. Lita and Jim occasionally woke up to garbage strewn across their lawn. At Jim's workplace, Crown Beverages, anonymous individuals sent crates of watermelons, a pointed, racially charged message that they weren't welcome.
Okay, so Shirley Hills wasn't exactly welcoming.
No. And Jim, being the a-hole that he was, he took notice of the reactions, but rather than, being there for his wife, comforting her, asking if she was okay, he seemed to love the controversy he was stirring. He liked the attention it brought him. He shoved his marriage in people's faces. At one time of the marriage, Jim said, "It was hubris. I wanted to show them I could get away with anything." And the marriage was going well for only a few months after Lita moved to Macon. But that stage didn't last. He missed his philandering ways. He began to spend more time working and traveling, which was just an excuse for him having sex with other ladies. And he starts to become more negative toward Lita. He's irritable, crabby, and bad-tempered. And he was extremely stingy with his money. He gives Lita a $150 allowance each week. She had to pay for everything out of that allowance. She had to pay for groceries, clothing, salon trips, entertainment, and gas. And Jim subtracted expenses out of her allowance when he purchased items that he deemed to be household items too. And some examples of this included ginger ale, which was 59 cents, or a carton of milk, which was $1.50. He even deducted gasoline expenses from her allowance too.
Talk about stingy. He's deducting a 59-cent ginger ale?
Yeah, and he would take guests out to dinner, and he made sure to spend lavishly on them. He wanted to show off his richness. He purchased expensive wines. But the strange part is he didn't spend that much on himself on basic items. Like, he didn't buy new suits for himself. He wore tailored suits. But at home, he didn't care what he wore. He even wore his uncle's tattered and yellowing shirts around the house. And he also wore his uncle's old underwear.
That's really odd.
Yeah, it's a little creepy. And he also stole condiment packages from restaurants, like ketchups and things like that. And to save pennies, he would reuse paper towels and ask Lita to reuse paper towels too. He rarely turned on the air conditioning. And from the outside looking in, Yvette Miller, who was also African American, became close friends with Lita. She described Lita during that time she lived in Macon. Lita, she was like a battered wife, but she didn't appear to be battered, but her soul, I think, was battered. But Lita, she doesn't want to call her marriage quits. She wants to save it. She wants to have that strong marriage as her parents did. She also doesn't want to prove her parents right.
I mean, it makes sense that she wants to save her marriage, and especially the fact that she's a Catholic, she feels like she has to.
Right.
But it just sucks for her. I mean, she's going through emotional abuse and all of these different things. And, you know, he's getting what he wants out of the relationship, but she's not. And I don't know, it's just not fair.
Yeah, and her mental health, it's just worsening by the day. And she starts suspecting that Jim is cheating on her, which he is, and their sex life becomes non-existent. He starts spending long evenings away from home, and when she cooks special meals, romantic dinners, or when she wears sexy lingerie, he's no longer interested. She knows something must be up. And when she says something about her suspicions, he becomes angry. He lashes out at her with his words. But then he buys her an expensive piece of jewelry to buy back her apology, and he'll tell her that she's just imagining his so-called affairs. And to validate her speculation, Lita would stop over at Jim's office to read his calendar. He always took detailed notes, however, it was hard to read his handwriting. The only name she could read was Tanya, but she didn't know who Tanya was. And it's like he had these meetings with her scheduled. Now, where we are in the story, it's about, in the 1980s when gaslighting wasn't really as known as it is today.
Yeah, I think back then it was just being dishonest or playing mind games.
Yeah, Jim, he's definitely abusing Lita emotionally, though she may not have realized it at the time. While he's denying that he's sleeping with anyone, which is a complete lie, he flirts in front of her. This flirtatious behavior only increases her suspicions. One of the women who Lita was eventually able to prove slept with her husband was a young woman by the name of Tanya Tanksley.
Oh, Tanya from the calendar. It's so nice that he was able to just pencil her in like that.
Yeah, and, he didn't really have much time for his wife, Lita. And so her suspicions were pretty accurate. The affair started just a few months after Jim and Lita's wedding in December of 1976. Jim saw Tanya, who was 18 and black, for the first time when she walked out of a convenience store. Jim was twice her age. He was 36. But Jim didn't seem to have much limitations when it came to age. He drove up to her in his Mercedes and bluntly asked her for her phone number. Teenage Tanya was surprised. She didn't get a chance to know this strange man who asked for her number. The shock of the question may not have given her enough time to think, but she jotted down the number and gave it to him. Then he called. She put off his advances for a while, but when Jim wants something, he makes sure he gets it. He kept calling Tanya. After about a month of consistent calls, the 18-year-old Tanya agreed to go out with a stranger who was twice her age. Tanya and Jim had a strange, intimate relationship, but she would also introduce him to other women too, with whom he would also have sex. And on top of all of this, Tanya knew that Jim was married, but that tiny factor did not bother her. Sherry Davis, the office manager at Jim's company, even knew that her boss was sleeping around, and she said that she would often hear the name Tanya. And she also found out that a husband from another woman who he slept with punched Jim out and broke his tooth, and he had to go to the dentist. And he also never wanted any of these women he became involved with to know that he had money, so he would borrow Sherry's car.
The office lady's car?
Yes. She had a Pontiac Grand Prix at the time, so he would use her car to hang out with these other women, and he would give her his Mercedes.
Oh, that's not a bad trade, actually.
Yeah, and there were some times that Sherry's Pontiac wasn't available, and he would actually use Lita's Mercedes. He would drive the Mercedes, use up all the gas in Lita's Mercedes, and then make her fill the car's tank with her measly allowance. And Lita wasn't really aware of this all happening during this time. However, she started to grow suspicious, especially when she found in her bathroom a blonde hair in the bathroom sink. She confronts Jim when he returns home from work, and Lita points out the blonde hair and asks him, "Whose is this?" Jim became annoyed, and he started gaslighting her again. "I have no idea," he responds. "Why are you showing me garbage?" Lita ignored his comment, saying that the hair couldn't belong to her, she has dark hair, and the blonde hair didn't resemble Jim's red hair. So again, she asked Jim, whose hair was it? Jim wouldn't answer her, and he said he didn't appreciate her accusing him. Lita had it with Jim's lies. She left to be with her parents, but after Jim's apologies and smooth talking, she returns to Jim again. When she returned to the Macon house, Jim surprises her with a $28,000 diamond ring. He promises that they'll get marriage counseling, which they never do. And I also want to point out that there's a catch to all of the jewelry that he has gifted to Lita. He keeps all this jewelry in his safe, and whenever she wants to wear a piece, she has to ask Jim for his permission. And eventually, when Lita does leave him and she takes the presents with her, Jim accuses her of stealing his jewelry.
Seems like this was just some type of power move, a way for him to control her.
Yeah, exactly. And in December of 1982, the name Tanya comes up again for Lita. She finds a Christmas card, which is for Jim, and there's a message inside. The message reads, "Missing your kisses at Christmas. Love, Tanya." Lita immediately remembers the name she saw in Jim's day planner. And this mistress was not smart enough to exclude her return address from the envelope. So Lita grabs her keys and she drives to the address on the Christmas card. She parks her car and she waits. She's probably steaming at this point, thinking of the strand of blonde hair that she found in the sink.
Well, I think Lita is going to be really surprised when she finds out that Tanya is actually black, because she's going to instantly realize that there are multiple women.
Yes, and she is shocked when she sees a black woman pull up to the house that she's parked in front of. She gets out of her car and approaches the woman, and Lita asks, "Are you Tanya?" And Tanya instantly recognizes the wife of the man with whom she had been having an affair and had introduced him to other sexual mates too. Tanya remained calm. "Yes, ma'am," she answers, but she doesn't feel guilty of her actions in any way. Tanya is thinking to herself that the affair had been going on for years. Lita should have known about the affair by now. It's not her fault that Lita never found out. Lita keeps questioning the cold Tanya. She asks Tanya, "Did you send this to my husband?" And she's holding this Christmas card in her hand while it's shaking in front of her. Tanya doesn't want any part of this conversation. She responds with a quick, "Excuse me?" and pushes past Lita to get into her house. Lita drives back home, and she packs as much as she can in her car and drives to her parents' home in Atlanta. And Jim does his smooth talking again. This time, it takes a little longer. Each of them contact their attorney, but the thing is, Lita really doesn't want to get a divorce. Her Catholic family frowns upon divorce, and she thinks of her parents too. She wants to have a marriage like her parents, and Jim knows this. He also doesn't want to be twice divorced. When Jim's attorney suggests a postnuptial agreement, both he and Lita agree to sign it. And there are many reasons why a married couple might choose to sign a postnuptial agreement. Some couples use it to clarify financial responsibilities, protect assets or businesses, or maybe shield one spouse from the other's debts. Others may create one for estate planning, ensuring certain assets go to children from previous relationships. And in some cases, a postnup can even help rebuild trust after issues like infidelity or financial disputes. This can serve as a tool to strengthen a marriage by setting clear expectations and providing financial security. And so the agreement improves Lita's financial situation, increasing her weekly allowance from $150 to $300. Additionally, if they divorce, she will receive $30,000 annually for 3 years following the separation. Despite this financial adjustment, Jim remains in control of all assets and properties, which are solely in his name. While the agreement offers some financial security, Lita ultimately accepts the terms and decides to return to the marriage. Now, do you remember when Uncle Frank offered Jim the opportunity to move to Georgia to take over Crown Beverages? And Jim took the offer and dragged his first wife and his kids to Georgia with him. Well, a similar incident happens. After 5 to 6 years of marriage, Jim becomes bored. And just like he became bored when he was living in Boston with his first wife, Catherine, he wants to start another adventure. He wants to move to Florida. He had already been to Florida a few times, actually, and he had fallen in love with a $2 million piece of beachfront property there, a mansion. Jim wanted to retire early and live there. So secretly, he began gathering all the money he needed, the $2 million, to purchase the property without letting his partner for life know.
Oh, so he never even brought this up to Lita. He just made the choice for them.
Yeah,
She
exactly.
had no say.
No. And it just seems like it's more proof that his wife's feelings were not a priority at all. His focus was entirely on his own wants in the moment. A woman named Joyce was one of the co-sellers of the house, and she thought it was weird that his wife never came to visit. She thought any wife would want to come and visit their future residents. She tells Jim, "I'm so curious to meet Mrs. Sullivan." And this is already after Jim has visited the estate multiple times. Joyce continued, "Isn't she anxious to see her new home?" Jim thought of a quick excuse. "Oh, she is so busy in politics and things." And he replied, "She's excited. She'll love it." Lita returns to Jim sometime in the spring or summer of 1983. Then later in the year, in October of 1983, Jim sells his company for $5 million. And during all of this time, Lita is kept in the dark. So when Jim tells her that they're moving to Palm Beach, Florida, and he sold the company, Lita is blindsided by this news, and she's not very thrilled with the idea either.
Yeah, I don't blame her.
And if you thought that where they were living in Georgia had a racist environment, Palm Beach was way worse. In fact, people also believe that this may be one of the reasons why Jim didn't tell Lita of their plans to move to Florida. She would want to come down to Florida to help him find a house, and he didn't want the neighbors knowing that his wife was Black. Lita would later tell others, "When my husband purchased the Palm Beach home, he did so over my objections." The mansion was gigantic. It had 24 rooms. There was a swimming pool, a 4-room apartment above the 3-car garage, a wine cellar, but Lita was not taken in by all of the property's extravagance.
Well, as long as he got what he wants and he's happy.
Yeah. Again, Lita thought, let people's actions and behaviors roll down her back. If she didn't have the support system in Florida, she would bring the support system to her. She had her friends and her parents over many times so that she could feel somewhat at home. But even though she was having her friends and family come over, she still missed Atlanta. Atlanta was her home. When she lived in Macon, at least she could visit Atlanta regularly. So she was able to persuade Jim to buy her a house in Atlanta for $440,000. And as he did with his previous properties, he did not list her name on the deed.
Well, without Lita around, he could probably start having affairs again.
Yeah, and he most likely did. And as you might have guessed, the marriage kept falling apart around Lita, leaving her feeling trapped with nowhere to turn. And in the end, she only saw one way out, one choice she never wanted to make. But this wasn't just a divorce, it was brutal, it was relentless. And in the end, it cost Lita everything. So stay tuned for the next episode to uncover Jim's next deceptive move, the lies, the manipulation, and the dark turns this divorce took. What was he hiding? How far would he go to stay in control? And most importantly, how did it all lead to Lita's tragic fate?
I can't wait till next week.
So join us next week as we unravel the rest of the story. In the meantime, please subscribe so that you get notified when the next episode posts. If you aren't a fan of ad interruptions, consider subscribing to enjoy your crime salad without the onions. But if you like them, that's cool too.
So check us out on Patreon or Apple Plus.
Until next time.